Now, the common narrative that we've been hearing about these stock gains is that traders are betting inflation is nearing a peak, even as central banks keep the hawkish rhetoric in the spotlight. And we'll watch that tomorrow. All that said, we know this has become a much more complicated environment for borrowers and mortgage holders in this country. It was clear after the Bank of Canada's latest rate hike that it is not yet done. We're seeing that hawkish approach impact Canada's household wealth, which dropped by nearly $1 trillion in the second quarter as plunging home prices and a weak stock market performance impacted net worth. Those numbers highlighting how interest rates are impacting the bottom lines of Canadians. Let's get some more perspective now. Shachi Kurl is president of the Angus Reid Institute and joins us with a little bit more. Shachi, nice to see you as always. Does it surprise you to see those numbers on household wealth at a time when obviously a lot of Canadians have been concerned about the impact from those higher interest rates?
You know, there's always going to be a bit of lag between what people perceive, what they're feeling, what they're planning for versus what the reality is. And so we may be into a period where people, in terms of their real situation today, it's maybe a little bit better than or a little bit unexpected in terms of what we're seeing. The question is always, where are Canadians headed in terms of their planning for their household wallet? What do they think is coming? Because we both know, John, that it's always a situation of confidence as well. It almost can matter less in terms of confidence in spending, getting ready for the worst, preparing for tougher times. That mindset can almost drive the reality of the situation. We've seen that happen before. It's often why we see politicians sometimes reticent in situations like this to acknowledge that maybe things are looking a little scarier because they don't want to talk people into a situation that they don't want to find themselves in essence.
And that certainly scares a lot of central bankers too. The idea that as long as inflation is high, as it enters the psyche of Canadians, that could further weigh against the outlook. What are you hearing when you poll Canadians right now, Shachi?
This is absolutely a time where people are alive to the higher cost of what feels like almost everything, whether it's groceries. We saw energy prices really high through the summer. We're seeing a bit of relief on that. But in terms of what Canadian households are expecting, they're expecting worse, not better. They are looking ahead and watching and listening to news. They're looking at what's happening in Europe and calibrating questions as to how that's going to fare for them in terms of energy costs heating their homes through the winter. We're seeing almost 80% of Canadians cutting back on their spending in some way, whether it's discretionary costs, driving less, giving less to charitable institutions, cutting back or trying to look for cheaper alternatives for groceries. All of this is really having an impact on their psyche. And we are also, of course, all watching job numbers. And for so many months, we've been hearing about labor shortages. As we get to a point where maybe that restaurant meal out is a second or a third thought now, or something that Canadians are deciding against, or whether that night out or that new outfit or that new laptop or that new washing machine or that major home renovation are deferred, as we're starting to hear from Canadians that they're planning to defer those things. What are the knock-on impacts on the small businesses and the industries that rely on that ecosystem to keep going?
Against that backdrop, big news in Ottawa over the weekend with a new leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, who in his acceptance speech talked a lot about the economy right now. How has the current economic environment, in your opinion, influenced the rising popularity of Poilievre?
Well, what the data shows us, because, you know, John, my opinion is just my opinion, and you've got so many learned guests on this broadcast. So we'll focus on what the data is showing us. And what the data shows us is that Canadians are worried about inflation. They are more than worried about it. They are feeling the impacts in real time of higher prices. And whether you're a higher income person or a lower income person, everyone is feeling it to a certain degree. Some people obviously pinched more than than others, but everyone's noticing it. So it's more about the opportunity that Pierre Poilievre has as leader of the Conservatives now in terms of his political communication, and who can not unsee or unhear that hashtag, just inflation, right? He's been a very effective communicator on this front. And inflation tends to be a really wicked problem for existing or incumbent governments. It actually doesn't matter their political stripe. Voters get really annoyed when there's high inflation. They look to their governments for solutions, whether or not those solutions are actually within the scope or the capacity of governments to really do much about, except for on the fringes. But it is the type of thing that, regardless of which party or which leader is in opposition, if you're doing an effective job of political communication, you can get people riled up. You can grow that base. And what we're hearing from Pierre Poilievre is a lot on connecting with people at the household level about the available dollars there is to spend to them, around their quality of life, and around the effectiveness of government. And that is a fight that any effective opposition leader can take to any government of any stripe and do very well with, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's that government sort of holding the responsibility or holding the reins or perceived to be holding the reins, where people are sitting back going, okay, what are you going to do about this?
Yeah, no doubt.